Welcome to the Paper Trails and Rabbit Holes podcast.
Welcome to the debate.
Yeah, it's an important one today.
It really is.
So in June 2025, a man threw a makeshift flamethrower into a peaceful crowd in Boulder, Colorado. He ended up murdering an 82-year-old woman.
Just a horrific event.
Absolutely. And around that exact same time, a college sophomore in Ohio was put under federal investigation simply for taking down a political flyer from a campus bulletin board.
Right, just removing a piece of paper.
Exactly. So today we are asking one of the most critical security questions of 2026. How did both of these events, end up classified in the exact same federal threat database?
Well, to figure that out, we are grounding our analysis in two really comprehensive security and political science reports. They were published between 2024 and early 2026.
Right.
And these documents, they track domestic data inflation, the actual reality of communal violence, and this really volatile collision between civil liberties and domestic security.
Yeah. We're basically looking at the concept of the new anti-Semitism, right? And asking, is America facing an unprecedented perfect storm of record-breaking hate?
Or on the flip side are institutional definitions of bigotry being stretched, weaponized to silence political dissent and shield the powerful?
Right. And I am looking squarely at the physical reality of this crisis. My position is that we are living through a systemic collapse of communal safety. I mean, the line between extreme political rhetoric and lethal violence has completely dissolved.
But is it a systemic collapse or a narrative? Because I approach this from a structural perspective. I'm looking at the power dynamics.
Okay, but we have measurable explosions of targeted violence.
Right. But the argument I am making, which draws directly from the data, is that the scale of this emergency is structurally engineered.
Engineered?
Yes. Institutions are deliberately inflating hate crime statistics to build this impenetrable shield, one that protects powerful political interests and neutralizes everyday democratic dissent.
I mean, to understand the gravity of my position, you just have to look at the immediate aftermath of the March 2026 Iran war outbreak. Within weeks, we saw a staggering 34% global spike in anti-Semitic incidents.
Right, the 34% number.
Yeah, but statistics can be abstract, right? So let's translate that into the human toll. Right now, 91% of Jewish Americans report feeling fundamentally less safe.
That's a massive number, sure.
Openly in public spaces, we have bypassed normal political friction. That is a systemic emergency.
Look, the psychological toll is undeniable, I agree. But we have to rigorously examine the mechanics of how that 34% spike was actually calculated.
Okay.
I am challenging the premise of the underlying data here. Over the last few years, monitoring organizations have systematically broadened their definition of hate. They adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA definition.
Right, the standard definition.
But mechanically, this definition includes clauses that classify harsh criticism of the State of Israel as inherent bigotry, like applying double standards or calling its founding racist.
Because it often is.
But by coding that into their methodology, these institutions can take standard political speech, like an anti-war rally or a campus sit-in, and automatically log it as a hate incident.
You are obsessing over the spreadsheet, while community centers are actively being targeted.
I'm looking at how the system converts peaceful protest into a terrifying hate statistic, chilling First Amendment rights.
We cannot discuss definitional parameters without confronting the lethal trigger events driving this fear. Look at the May 2025 Capitol Jewish Museum murders.
Right, the Elias Rodriguez case.
Exactly. Rodriguez did not care about the IHRA definition. He walked up to a group of young professionals and fired 20 rounds. He killed Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky.
It was an absolute tragedy.
And then weeks later, you have the Boulder firebombing. Mohammed Sabri Soliman attacked a march advocating for hostages using Molotov cocktails. He injured 15 people and burned Karen Diamond to death. This is undeniable forensic proof of a real safety crisis.
Violence is real, and those perpetrators belong in federal prison. But when monitoring groups like the ADL cite a record high of 9,354 incidents in 2024 to demand federal intervention, we have to look under the hood.
Okay, but the number reflects the hostility.
Does it? A staggering 58% of those incidents were entirely related to Israel or Zionism. Their methodology includes nonviolent political activism, like a student tearing down a war-related poster.
But people are actually getting hurt.
I am not denying the physical violence.
It feels like you are arguing over the formatting of a weather report while a Category 5 hurricane is tearing the roof off the house. Yes, pulling down a poster is legally distinct from a firebombing.
Very distinct.
But when a community's sacred spaces become frontline targets for domestic terror, every act of targeted hostility compounds the trauma. Arguing that a protest chant shouldn't be in the same database ignores how this low-level hostility provides the cultural permission structure for lethal violence.
But that database is actively being used by the federal government to subpoena and investigate citizens. Conflating a political chant with a firebombing destroys our ability to measure actual violent bigotry.
I don't see it that way.
It weaponizes civil rights legislation. Look at Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The American Association of University Professors analyzed campus complaint letters and found that 79% of them focused exclusively on speech criticizing Israel,
Right, but the tone of that speech...
with zero reference to Jewish people or the Jewish religion. The mechanism here is clear. You create an environment where a student opposing the Iran war is automatically investigated by the Department of Education as a bigot. That silences dissent.
Well, this definitional friction isn't just happening on college campuses. It is actively shaping how we process transparency and truth right now.
How so?
Look at the release of the 3 million pages of Department of Justice files regarding Jeffrey Epstein in January 2026.
Oh, right, the document dump.
Yeah, this was supposed to be a watershed moment for institutional transparency. Instead, it instantly became a radicalization engine. It became a trope factory.
A trope factory.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, tropes are basically just mean old stories. Repeated lies used to target a group. People completely ignored the actual empirical DOJ findings.
Which found no master list.
Exactly. They explicitly concluded there was no master client list and no centralized blackmail operation. But bad actors used the dump to invent stories about secret Zionist blackmail rings subverting Western democracy.
Well, let's look at the media's role in that.
It is the literal resurrection of the protocols of the elders of Zion, operating in plain sight. And it is pulling a whole new generation into extremist ideology.
What you're describing as a radicalization engine operates completely differently from my vantage point. It is like a smoke grenade thrown into a bank vault.
A smoke grenade.
Yeah, you are so busy coughing and pointing at the smoke, you don't notice the money is actually gone. Think about the real contents of those 3 million pages.
Okay, let's hear it.
We had UN experts identifying evidence of human trafficking networks, internal DEA memos detailing suspicious multi-million-dollar international wire transfers, raw, documented proof of elite impunity.
Yes, but the internet focused on the tropes.
But the mainstream media barely touched the DEA memos. Instead, they utilize the accusation of anti-Semitism as an institutional shield.
How is it a shield when the conspiracy theories online were explicitly targeting Jewish names and promoting anti-Jewish animus?
Because of how news desks function, covering international financial corruption requires massive resources and carries the risk of libel suits from powerful people.
Sure.
But pivoting the coverage to focus on the motives of the internet commentators, that's cheap, it's easy, and it's morally unassailable. Whenever an independent journalist asks a pointed question about a politician's financial ties, institutions branded the inquiry as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Because the inquiries were using anti-Semitic framing.
But by making the motives of the readers the primary news story, the media effectively memory-hold the actual corruption. Elite impunity just vanishes, shielded by the accusation of bigotry.
You are entirely discounting the psychological and physical fallout of those narratives. When public figures legitimize the myth of a Jewish blackmail ring, it translates directly into real-world targeting.
But it shouldn't stop legitimate investigation.
1/3 of the community reported being personally harassed in the wake of the Epstein file release. You can thoroughly investigate elite corruption without relying on ancient blood libels.
I agree with that.
When society tolerates hateful mythologies under the guise of, anti-establishment inquiry, it places a target on the back of every community center in the country. The normalization of the conspiracy fuels the physical violence.
But look at who benefits from setting the social cost of that inquiry so astronomically high. By centering the narrative on fringe commentators who use hateful rhetoric, institutions tar all legitimate inquiries with the same brush.
It's not a brush. It's a reality of the rhetoric being used.
It is a procedural bar. If asking questions about DEA memos gets you labeled a bigot, the mainstream press won't touch it, and the powerful remain insulated.
Well, let's follow that logic into visible, documented political action then. Specifically, the domestic frictions surrounding the 2026 Iran war.
Okay, let's talk about the war protests.
We have completely abandoned policy critique and entered the realm of explicit dehumanization. Look at the March 2026 protests outside the White House.
They were anti-war protests.
Demonstrators utilized textbook blood libel imagery, graphic signs depicting political leaders physically consuming children. That is not a critique of military strategy, right?
It's extreme imagery, yes.
It is taking a medieval mythology specifically designed to trigger pogroms and projecting it onto the president's lawn.
But the demonstrators explicitly maintained their target was the political alliance driving the airstrikes, not Jewish people.
The aesthetic choices of their protest dictate otherwise. And we see this exact same targeted animus in the discourse surrounding campaign finance.
How so?
There is a glaring double standard applied to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC. During the March 2026 Illinois congressional primaries, political figures were screaming about AIPAC spending $22 million.
Right, $22 million in a single primary.
They used language like toxic subversion and buying democracy. That level of existential scrutiny is simply not applied to big pharma, the gun lobby, or foreign oil interests. It relies on deeply rooted prejudice.
Wait, but look at the money.
I am looking at the money, and the rhetoric is completely disproportionate.
You are isolating a $22 million spend in a single primary, but the structural reality is about dark money on a massive, unprecedented scale. Since 2021, AIPAC and its affiliated networks have spent over $221 million on U.S. elections.
Which is legal political participation.
Let's be academically precise here. These super PACs are legally allowed to obscure their donor bases. Tracing capital and criticizing a massive lobbying apparatus, which is basically just people paying to influence leaders, is a core function of democracy.
Then why is AIPAC the only political action committee that candidates are routinely demanded to publicly disavow to prove their moral purity?
Because no other single-issue advocacy group is dropping $221 million to systematically eliminate progressive anti-war politicians while using dark money conduits to hide the original source of the funds.
That's a highly specific framing.
Criticizing that influx of capital is how a democracy protects itself. But instead of engaging with campaign finance, the establishment deploys the new anti-Semitism label to neutralize the critics.
It's not a label, it's a description of the rhetoric.
It is a mechanism designed to chill the anti-war movement. Trace the $221 million, you're a bigot. Organize a campus walkout against airstrikes in Iran, you're a bigot. It protects a highly lethal foreign policy from democratic accountability.
But you cannot divorce the language used to criticize that capital from its historical baggage. When national political figures accuse a Jewish organization of acting as a shadowy network, they are tapping into prejudice that historically results in mass violence.
I'm not defending bigoted language.
That rhetoric creates the permission structure I mentioned earlier. It emboldens lone wolves. The man who committed the Capitol Jewish Museum murders wrote a manifesto citing his belief that he was fighting a Zionist political cabal.
Right.
The rhetoric does not exist in a vacuum. Words have lethal consequences.
Words do have consequences, I completely agree, but the consequence of recategorizing campaign finance reform and anti-war demonstrations as hate crimes is the total hollowing out our First Amendment.
I think that's an exaggeration.
It's not. Modern anti-war movements inherently target state violence and the political capital that funds it. By statistically conflating anti-war sentiment with violent bigotry, the establishment actually makes authentic prejudice harder to track.
Well, we've unpacked the mechanics of data, media, and campaign finance today. But for me, the core of this issue always returns to the physical reality of the communities enduring it.
The violence is the tragedy, yes.
When recurring historical myths are normalized, and when double standards regarding political participation are openly tolerated, it inevitably manifests as physical violence. A 91% communal fear rate and firebombed vigils are not statistical anomalies.
No, they aren't.
They are the metric of a society that is rapidly failing to protect its vulnerable, having allowed lethal hate to successfully disguise itself as political critique.
And my conclusion is that protecting minority communities from physical violence is an absolute, non-negotiable imperative. But we cannot allow the definitions of bigotry to be stretched so far that they mutate into an institutional shield.
A shield that you believe hides other motives?
Exactly. We cannot permit these definitions to protect unlimited dark money, to memory hole elite government corruption in the Epstein files, or to systematically silence legitimate, democratic dissent against foreign wars.
It's a complex dynamic.
The survival of a functioning democracy requires the ability to scrutinize and challenge power without being falsely prosecuted as a hater.
Well, the tension between protecting a community from targeted violence and protecting a society's right to free speech remains profoundly unresolved.
Very much so.
There is so much more nuance to explore in these security reports. Ultimately, listeners, you must examine the evidence, the statistics, and the human toll to determine exactly where that line should be drawn.
The paper trail doesn't have to end here, but the descent is just beginning. Find us at PaperTrails&RabbitHoles on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you hunt for the truth. Keep your eyes open. We'll see you at the bottom.